In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. The Qur'an and the Nature of Life by Ayatollah Murtadha Mutahhari. The Qur'an and the Nature of Life. This is the second of a series of 3 related articles by Ayatollah Murtadha Mutahhari on topics relating to soul, life, and evolution, and published in a collection entitled Maqalat Falsafi, or Philosophical Essays. The Persian titles of these essays are Asalati Ruh, Qur'an Hayat, and Tawhid va Takamul. There are 3 more essays in this collection entitled Pursishhay Falsafi Abu Rayhan az Abu Ali, and Asl Tazad dar Falsafe Islami, and lastly Bahs Harakat. Here we intend to carry out a Quranic study of the problem of life to find out the specific viewpoint of the Qur'an about life. In particular, we intend to study the view that the Qur'an takes of the relation between life and the supranatural world and divine will. The noble Qur'an recurrently mentions life. In many of its verses, the coming to life of creatures, the different stages of life, the system involved in the creation of living creatures, the effects of life such as intelligence, consciousness, perception, hearing, sight, guidance, inspiration, instinct, and the like are mentioned as the signs indicative of divine wisdom and design. Each of these constitutes an interesting subject in itself, but here we do not intend to discuss them. One of the themes discussed by the Qur'an in relation to life is that life is in the hands of God. It is God who gives and takes away life. By this, the noble Qur'an means that life is not within the control of anyone except God. No one else can give life or take it away. The issue that we now intend to discuss is this. In the 2nd chapter or surah of the Qur'an quotes Abraham, peace be with him, as saying to the tyrant of his time in Surah 2 verse 258, "My Lord is He who gives life and causes to die." And additionally in Surah 67, Surah Mulk, verse 2, God is described in these words, "He who created death and life." There are many verses in the Qur'an which consider God as the sole giver of life and death, and the giving and taking away of life is directly attributed to God and considered His exclusive prerogative. Also, in the verses where some of the prophets are described as bringing the dead to life, the Qur'an is careful to point out that such a thing could occur only with God's permission. An example can be found in Surah 3, verse 49. It says, "A messenger to the children of Israel, saying, I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. I will create for you out of clay as the likeness of a bird. Then I will breathe into it, and it will be a bird, by the permission of God. I will also heal the blind and the leper, and bring to life the dead, by the permission of God." On the whole, it is one of the points of difference between the Theists and the materialists that whereas the Theists consider the origin and source of life and its creator as transcending matter, the materialists consider matter itself to be the creator of life. However, something which is significant in this regard is that there is a subtle but enormous difference between the logic of the Qur'an and the usual logic of the Theists, considering the thesis that God is the creator of life. This subtle difference is another of the miraculous characteristics of this noble book called the Qur'an. We believe that if the theistic thinkers become familiar with this logic, they can once for all release themselves from the harassment of the materialists and also liberate those poor creatures too from the clutches of their fancies and error. The problem of origin of life. Ordinarily, when theistic thinkers want to relate the matter of life to God and divine will, they bring up the problem of origin of life on the earth and the question regarding the cause of the first emergence of life. Conclusive scientific evidence indicates that life had a definite beginning on the surface of the earth, that none of the various types of living creatures, including animals and plants, have always existed since eternity. This is because the earth itself has a limited age. Moreover, it was not in its estimated life of several million years that was always fit for life. We observe that each individual of a species is always born from another individual belonging to that species. For example, wheat comes from wheat, barley comes from barley, a horse from horse, a camel from camel, and a human being from a human being. It is not the practice of nature that an animal or plant, for instance, should come into existence from a mass of sheer dust. Always, the origin of a living creature is traceable to another living creature from which it separates in the form of a seed or sperm and grows in a suitable location. Now, how did life start in the beginning, and through what means? Does every one of these innumerable species end in an individual living creature that is the source of its particular species? If that is the case, how did that first creature come into existence? Because it seems like nature disallows the emergence of a living creature without a seed or sperm or something that should have separated it from a living creature before it. Hence, they pointed out, we must admit that an exception to the rule must have occurred. In other words, a miracle had occurred and the divine hand had emerged from the hidden to create that first living creature. Or is it possible that all these species have had a single source and root and are members of a family of species? On the basis of this hypothesis, too, we confront the same problem. That is, even if we suppose that all species are to have been derived from a single unicellular organism, the same question emerges as to how that first living creature came into existence. Isn't it the case that science has proved that a living creature cannot come into existence except from another living creature? Hence, was there an exception to the rule and a miracle in that the will of God interfered to create instantaneously a living cell? It is here that the adherents of the materialistic outlook are forced to put forward certain hypotheses which are incredible to themselves. The theists, on the contrary, consider it as an evidence for the existence of a creator, and they say that a supernatural power did interfere to create the first living creature, and that it was the will of God that led to its emergence. Such was the view of Darwin, who was personally a theist. After having solved the problem of branching out of species for himself, he arrived at one or several living creatures who first emerged on the Earth's surface without having been reproduced by another living creature. He says regarding them that as for these, they came to life through the divine breath. Chrissy Morrison, in the book The Secret of Man's Creation, says in this regard, some say that the corpuscles of life escaped from one of the planets and after wandering in the atmosphere for ages and consecutive centuries descended on the Earth's surface. Such a belief is not acceptable because it is impossible that they should have survived the space's absolute cold, and even if, supposedly, they could survive that danger, the cosmic rays are scattered in space, and that would have destroyed them. Even if they could pass through this stage, they must have come down accidentally in a very favorable point such as oceanic depths, where several conditions existed simultaneously and a suitable environment was created for them. After all these problems now, the question still arises about the origin of life and as to how it did emerge in other planets. Today, it has been proved for certain that no environment, however favorable and conducive to life, can create it. Similarly, no kind of chemical synthesis or combination can create a life corpuscle. the problem of life still remains one of the unsolved problems of science. Some say that a mini particle of matter, or of a microscopic size, coagulating with a large number of particles of atomic size, disturbed their equilibrium and assumed the form of life through their inclusion and exclusion. Nonetheless, no one has claimed until now that he has produced life with the means of chemical action and reaction. By this discussion, Chrissy Morrison intends to prove that the hand of a creator is involved in the origin and beginning of life, because it cannot be explained by material or natural causes. Concerning the origins of the human being and the great metamorphosis that resulted in the emergence of an intelligent creature with an extraordinary capacity for discursive thought and power that could create the sciences, he says, "The emergence of man as an intelligent and thoughtful creature is too profound to be considered an effect of material changes in which a creator's hand was not involved." Now, this was a sample of the mode of thought and argument of this group in relation to life and the divine will. There is no need to cite more or less similar statements of others that do not differ essentially from the passage that was quoted above. As we know, till now, the human being has not been able, despite all his efforts, to produce with scientific means the substance that makes up the living creatures. For instance, he has been unable to produce with chemical substances an artificial wheat grain possessing the properties of a living grain, which may grow into a plant when sown and develop ears. Nor has he been able to produce artificially the sperm of an animal or man with the capacity to develop into an animal or human. Nevertheless, scientists have not ceased in their efforts, and as yet, it has not been conclusively clear for them whether they would be able to do so in the future, or if this matter lies beyond the human's scientific and technical capacities. This topic too, which relates to the future, has, like the problem of the origin of life, created a controversy throughout the world. And inevitably, that group of theists who, with their above-mentioned approach and logic, say that the creation of life is in the hands of God, are of the opinion that in this question too, man's efforts in the field are bound to be fruitless. Since man has no control over life, which is exclusively subject to the divine will, man cannot create life anytime at his will with the scientific and technical means at his disposal. The prophets who raised the dead were able to do so with the permission of God. It is not possible for anyone to perform such an act without the permission of God. And if anyone wants to do such a thing with the permission of God, it would mean that such a human has joined the ranks of the prophets and performed a miracle. And of course, God does not carry out a miracle except at the hands of his prophets and awliya, close friends. The group of theists consider man's present incapacity in this regard as the proof of their claim. When they observe that the human being has produced wheat grains that do not differ in any way in their chemical composition from natural wheat, but are devoid of the characteristics of life, they point out that it is because life depends exclusively on the will of God, and that the creation of life requires God's permission, which he does not give to anyone except his apostles. We said that the Noble Qur'an explicitly affirms that life is in the hands of God, and that it negates the role of anyone else in the creation of life. However, the Qur'an never refers to the matter of the origin of the human species or the beginning of life in order to affirm this point. On the contrary, it points as evidence to the present empirical order and considers the current ongoing system of life as the system of creation, becoming, and development. But when it wishes to describe God's creatorhood in relation to life, it does not make recourse to the first day. In this respect, it makes no distinction between the first day and the subsequent days. Rather, it points to the present orderly changes of life as the changes of creation. For instance, in the blessed Surah Al-Mu'minun, or Surah 13, verses 12 to 14, it states, We created man of an extraction of clay. We set him a drop in a receptacle that was secure. Then we created of the drop a clot. Then we created of the clot a tissue. Then we created of the tissue bones. And then we garmented the bones in flesh. Thereafter we produced him as another creature. So blessed be God, the most excellent of creators. This noble verse mentions the systematic transformation and changes that occur in the embryo and considers these developments as a developing series of creation. Additionally, in Surah 71 verses 13 to 14, it says, "What ails you that you look not for majesty in God, seeing He created you by stages?" And in Surah Al-Zumar, or in Surah 39 verse 6, it states, "He creates you in your mother's wombs, creation after creation, in threefold shadows." In Surah 2 verse 28, it also says, "How do you disbelieve in God, seeing you were dead, and He gave you life? Then He shall make you dead, and then He shall give you life, and then to Him you shall be returned." In Surah 22 verse 66, it states, "It is He who gave you life. Then He shall make you dead, and then He shall give you life again." There are many verses on this theme, and all of them consider the present, current order as the system of creation. The splitting of the grain and the seed under the ground, the growth of plants and herbs, the greening of the trees in springtime, all of these are mentioned as part of the ever new and perpetual divine creativity. In no place does the Qur'an consider the role of divine creativity and will in the creation of life as relating exclusively to the first human being or the first living creature that emerged upon the earth's surface, or consider that the organism or grain to be the only creature of God and the product of divine will. The noble Qur'an also mentions the creation of Adam, but not for the purpose of affirming monotheism, Tawhid, or for the sake of the argument that since Adam was the first human, that proves that creation did occur and that God's hand emerged from its sleeve to create human life. Well, to begin with, God's hand was never and has ever been concealed within a sleeve. There is a strange point worthy of notice in this regard. The Qur'an makes use of the story of Adam to convey many teachings of a moral and educative character, such as the human's capacity for attaining to the station of God's vicegerency, or his abundant capacity for knowledge, and the angel's humility in front of knowledge, or the human's capacity for attaining superiority over the angels. And then there's the harm of greed and the harms of pride and the effects of sin in causing the man's decline from the most sublime of stations. And then there's the role of repentance and penitence in the human's salvation and his return to the station of proximity to God, as well as warnings against the danger of misleading, satanic insinuations and whispers, and the like. It has all of this, but it never relates the special and exceptional situation of Adam in his creation to the subject of Tawhid or monotheism and theology, because the purpose behind its mention of Adam's story was a moral and educative one. It was not intended as an evidence in favor of Tawhid or monotheism. Moreover, it confines itself to mentioning Adam and says nothing about how the life of the other animal species originated on the earth. We have mentioned earlier the customary approaches of the Theists who, when confronted with the absence of an explanation for the beginning of life in the first living creature, they say it was the divine breath which brought it into existence. But the Qur'an considers the life of other human beings also to be the result of the divine breath, in the same way as it considers the life of Adam as being due to the divine breath. In one place, the Qur'an relates God as saying to the angels regarding Adam, in Surah 16 verses 28 and 29, "And when your Lord said to the angels, 'See, I am creating a mortal, a human, of clay, of mud molded, and when I have shaped him and breathed my spirit into him, fall down and prostrate before him. In another place it says in Surah 7 verse 11, we created you, then we shaped you, then we said to the angels, prostrate yourselves to Adam. It is clear in this verse that creation, or the blowing of the divine breath, and the veneration and praise of angels is ascribed to all human beings in general. The Qur'an states in Surah 32 verses 7 till 9, God is He who perfected everything that He created and commenced man's creation from clay. Then He made his progeny from an extract of a base fluid. Then He proportioned him and breathed into him of His Spirit and made for you the hearing, the sight, and the hearts. But little do you think. As pointed out by the exegetes, and as indicated in the context itself, the pronoun in sawahu, or in English, He shaped it, relates to sulala, or progeny, and not to insan, or human. The origin of life and the divine will. Here, it is essential to discover the reason why ordinarily the theists refer to the origin and beginnings of life when relating life to the divine will, and to discover as well the reason why the noble Qur'an has never taken this path in its effort to affirm or confirm monotheism, considering as it does life and biological developments absolutely the direct result of God's will, without making any distinction whatsoever between the beginning of life and its continuation. The truth is that this difference arises from a more fundamental difference between the logic of the Qur'an and all other approaches. It lies in this that a group of theists ordinarily see God from the negative, not the positive, aspect of their knowledge. That is, when faced with a failure to overcome something unknown, then they bring in God. They always seek God amid or amongst the mass of things unknown to them. That is, they always go after things whose natural causes are unknown to them. When in a certain case they encounter something whose natural cause is unknown to them, they immediately say, this was brought into existence by God's will. Inevitably, the more the number of things whose natural causes are unknown to them, the more their evidence of God's existence, and the more the number of things known and explained, the lesser evidence they seem to have for God's existence. For a group of theologists and adherents of monotheism, the supranatural realm is a storehouse of their unknowns. And whenever they fail to understand and know something and to discover its natural cause, they immediately relate it to the supranatural. They see the role of the supernatural as lying in what appears to them exceptions to the natural order and violations of the course of nature. When they do not find a natural cause in a certain case, they substitute it with a supernatural one, unmindful of the fact that firstly, the supernatural realm has its own order and law, and secondly, it seems like they forget that if a cause takes the place of a material and a natural cause, then the substitute cause must itself be a material and natural cause on a par with matter and nature. And if this is the case, then it does not remain a supernatural cause. The natural and supernatural exist on separate planes and not on the same plane. Neither a natural cause can take the place of a supranatural cause, and vice versa. Neither can a supernatural cause take the place of a natural cause. The Holy Qur'an never relies for the evidence of the existence of the one God on cases where the system of natural law and order appears to have been violated. It relies in this regard on cases whose preliminaries and natural causes are known to the people, and it cites this order itself as a testimony to God's existence. In the case of life, the logic of the Qur'an rests on the view that life is absolutely an emanation or faith, higher and above the horizon of the physical and sensible. Whatever the character of the laws involved in it, its sources lie on a plane higher than that of the sensible or material matter. Hence, the developments of life are the developments of creation. From the viewpoints of this logic, it makes no difference whether life was created instantaneously in a single moment or in the form of a gradual evolution with one creation following another. This logic rests on the principles that sensible matter is essentially devoid of life, and that life is a light and emanation that must come from a higher source. Hence, the laws of life, whatever form they may have, are the same as the laws of creation. The difference between the existential degrees and planes of matter and life is a scientific and proved principle. If we want to discover the supernatural source of life through the difference of existential planes between matter and life, it has to be on the basis of the positive aspects of our knowledge, not its negative aspects. Thereby, we would be searching for God in what is known to us, not in what is unknown to us. Then, we would not be compelled to bring down the supernatural from its plane as a substitute for a natural cause that we may fail to discover. Rather, we would assume that a natural cause is definitely involved, although the frontiers of scientific knowledge have not yet reached it. Mullah Sadra, in his book Al-Asfar concerning the soul, severely attacks Fakhruddin Razi precisely for this reason. He says, "I am amazed at this man and the likes of him, who, whenever they want to prove the doctrine of Tawhid or monotheism, or some other religious doctrine, they look for instances where the natural cause involved has not been recognized, and where, according to their belief, the order of the world has been violated and the laws have been broken." Conclusion. From the body of verses cited above, it can be inferred that creation is not an instantaneous process from the viewpoint of the Qur'an. An animal or human being passes through various evolutionary stages and is always in the process of creation. Rather, basically, the world is always in the process of creation and in the state of perpetual coming into being. There is an opposite viewpoint which considers creation to be something instantaneous. Whenever its proponents want to discuss the world's creation, they go after, quote-unquote, the first moment when the world was created and brought out from the cover of nothingness. They imagine that if they were not to make such an assumption, the world could no longer be regarded as a creation and as something that came into being. Similarly, whenever they want to discuss life as a divine creation, they always go after, quote-unquote, the first moment when life began. This type of thinking is quite similar to that of the mentioned Jews in the Qur'an. In Surah 5, in verse 64, the Jews say, "God's hand is tied up. Tied up be their hands, and cursed be they for what they say." That mode of thinking about the relation of life to the divine will that always goes back to the beginning of life in order to relate it to God's will is the offspring or the product of this type of outlook. This outlook, which was originally expressed by the Jews, gradually became prevalent and has spread everywhere. And regrettably, Islamic theologians too come under its influence. However, as pointed out, the idea of a quote-unquote first moment is actually foreign to the teachings of the noble Qur'an. As indicated earlier, a problem that is discussed in our times is whether a human being would ever be capable of making a living organism. Would he, for instance, be able to make an artificial human spermatozoan, which when deposited in the womb or some other suitable environment, be able to develop into a complete human being? We said that a group of theists, whose mode of thinking concerning the relation of life to the divine will always turns to cases of exception and the first beginnings of life, emphatically negates such a possibility. But on the basis of the teachings that we have received from the Qur'an, we can say there is nothing that stands in the way of such a possibility. This matter needs elaboration and must be examined from two aspects. Firstly, we must examine the amount of structural complexity of a living organism to see whether or not someday a human being would be able to discover all the secrets that go into the material composition of the parts of a cell and the natural law responsible for the emergence of a living cell. We cannot say anything from this aspect, for the issue lies outside the scope of our expertise and competence. This is what the experts in the field have said. That which is more significant and higher than the creation of the earth, the planets of the solar system, and the whole universe is the substance of the protoplasm. Secondly, if man one day succeeds in discovering the law of creation of living organisms, in the same way as he has discovered the laws relating to other creatures, and discovers all the conditions and material constituents of living organisms, and succeeds in preparing substances exactly like those of living organisms, will that artificial being possess life? The answer is that it will definitely possess life, for it is impossible that the conditions for the existence of an emanation should exist completely without the realization of that emanation. Isn't it the case that one self-sufficient and absolutely perfect divine essence is the absolute source of all emanations? And isn't the necessary being, by essence, necessary in all aspects and ways? Here, the doubt may possibly arise in some minds that if such be the case, what will become of the principle that life is exclusively in the hands of God, and that others have no role in the giving and taking away of life? We have said that this is something acknowledged by the Noble Qur'an, and the answer to this question becomes clear after a review of what has been said. Should man attain such a capacity one day, all that he would have done is to be able to prepare the conditions of life, not the ability to create life. You see, the human being cannot give life, but he can complete the capacity of matter for receiving life. In other words, the human being is the agent of motion, not the source of being. If the human being succeeded in doing such a thing, surely he would have made an important achievement from the viewpoint of scientific discovery. But from the viewpoint of a role in creation of life, his role would be the same as that of the parents in reproduction and procreation of offspring, or of the peasant in creating life in wheat grains. In none of these cases is human being the creator of life. All that he accomplishes is to prepare the conditions of a substance for receiving life. The Noble Qur'an has described this matter in the best possible manner in the blessed surah number 56, verses 63 to 64. Have you considered the soil that you till? Do you yourselves make the plants grow, or are we the ones who make them grow? And in Surah 56, verses 58 to 59, it says, have you considered the seed that you spill? Do you yourselves create it, or are we the creators? As to the miracles performed by the prophets, their miraculous character lies in that the human being is incapable of performing such acts with his ordinary knowledge and power. The prophets too had not attained that knowledge and capacity through the ordinary means. An extraordinary power and knowledge that accompanied them had raised them over the plane of physical nature, which made it possible for them to become a source of such prodigious performance. If one day the human being succeeds in his achievement in the artificial creation of life, it would not mean that he has succeeded in doing something which the prophets did with the permission of God. The prophets used to give life and take it away with the permission of God. But if ordinary human beings someday attain such a capacity, that would be the capacity only to prepare the conditions for life. In the same way as today, they are capable of causing death by destroying the conditions of life without possessing the capacity to take away life. The giving and taking of life will remain in God's hands, even if the human being, through the discovery of the laws of emanation and withdrawal of life, prepares or destroys the capacities of a substance for possessing life. We said that the human being cannot create life, and that creation of life lies outside the scope of his capacities. The giving and withdrawal of life is only in God's hands, although the human being can prepare the conditions necessary for life to exist. This must not lead us to conclude that there is some kind of division of work, that there are some activities that pertain to human beings without pertaining to God, and that there are other activities that pertain to God without pertaining to the human being. Our sole objective is delimitation of the scope of human beings' activities, not delimitation of God's acts. That which characterizes the divine aspect is absolute freedom, or itlaq, an absence of limits. The limits and bounds are from the side of the creature. This matter needs an elaborate treatment, and I request the reader to refer to the 5th volume of Usul Falsafe va Ravish Realism. This marks the end of the article by Ayatollah Murtadha Mutahhari. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين.